In wartime Berlin, bombing raids, rationing, and shortages made every bit of fresh food a treasure. And in the sweltering summer of 1944, keeping raw meat, a bowl of quark, or cream from spoiling overnight was no simple task. If it spoiled, you didn't just lose dinner. You lost days' worth of rations you might never replace. So why not just use a refrigerator? The answer's simple. Fridges weren't common, not before the war, and certainly not during it. Electric refrigerators have been around since the 1920s. Sure, Germany wasn't exactly behind the curve when it came to industrial innovation, but those machines were expensive, bulky, and rare. In working-class apartments, they weren't even a consideration, more like a rumor from the kitchens of luxury hotels, hospitals, or commercial settings. And when the war started, even those rare fridges became ghosts. Electricity wasn't available. Air raids knocked out power lines for days. Blackouts weren't just nightly routines. They were mandatory. Entire neighborhoods would go dark. Factories that once made home appliances were quickly converted to produce tanks, bullets, and uniforms. Copper and steel were swallowed by the war machine. You wouldn't waste a single screw on a household luxury when the front lines needed it more. And besides, even if you had a fridge, what would you power it with? The flickering supply of electricity made them more of a liability than a help. So the real question becomes, what did they do instead? Even with no power, no fridge, life and meals had to go on. So Berliners turned to what they knew. Centuries-old methods, wartime improvisation, and clever tricks passed from neighbor to neighbor. It wasn't always safe. It wasn't always sanitary, but it worked. At least, most of the time. So, winter should be easy, right? With temperatures often dipping below freezing, the outside world was now colder than any fridge could offer. Berliners wasted no time in turning that to their advantage. Snow wasn't just piled on the streets. It became a storage solution. Pots of food were buried in bowls of snow and placed on balconies. Milk bottles tucked into snowdrifts could last for days. Even meat could be left outside. Though the real trick was making sure it didn't disappear, whether by animals or desperate hands. Basements also saw a transformation. Unheated and buried deep underground, they already served as air raid shelters, but now they doubled as cold pantries. The temperature down there was stable, and that made them ideal. Families chalked off small corners to store their perishables, and in some cases, shelves were shared by entire buildings. Still, for anyone needing more than a chilly windowsill, Berliners found another solution, building their own ice boxes out of wooden crates. These very boxes could keep butter, milk, or cooked meals cool for days. Military crates were especially popular. Sturdy, easy to stack, and just the right size. Most were kept in stairwells, balconies, or near broken windows where the cold air helped to do the rest. And the colder the outside, the longer the box stayed effective. Even the rooms themselves played a part. Families deliberately left certain areas unheated. Attics, storage rooms, even entire hallways were turned into makeshift fridges. A cold, unused bedroom could hold days' worth of food. That saved fuel and kept rations safe. But for families living on the edge of Berlin, winter offered one more trick: natural ice. When lakes froze solid, Berliners hauled out blocks using sleds and carts. These chunks were packed in sawdust and stored in cellars. It was a technique almost forgotten until the war forced it back. And for the families who managed to build their own ice reserves, that effort paid off, week after frozen week. But more than the tools, it was the mindset that mattered. People didn't just deal with the cold, they got creative with it. One person figured something out, and by morning, the whole block was doing it too. So yes, Berliners used the cold to their advantage. But the cold also worked against them. The same cold that kept food safe would also ruin it. Milk or soup could freeze solid, cracking bottles and shattering jars. Soft fruits and cheeses turned mushy after thawing. Frozen bread or meat needed extra fuel to defrost. Winter survival wasn't about letting the cold do all the work, it was about staying one step ahead of it. Too much cold and the food was ruined. Too little and it spoiled. Berliners had to walk a narrow line, always watching, shifting, and adjusting, turning the season from a blunt force in nature into a tool they could actually use. But then came summer, and that's when the real challenge began. Summers were usually warm with stuffy rooms, no airflow. and absolutely no electricity to power cooling appliances. Keeping food from spoiling wasn't just difficult, it was a full-time task, but people got creative. A common trick was the wet towel method, a bottle of milk wrapped in a damp cloth, placed near an open window or drafty corridor. It wasn't refrigeration, but it worked. As the water in the towel evaporated, it drew heat away from the milk, keeping it cooler for longer. In the narrow courtyards of Berlin's tenement blocks, residents learned to turn shade into a survival tool. They strung up hanging baskets on ropes, creating makeshift pantries that swung between the walls. Tucked away in the cool, shadowy spaces between buildings, these baskets cradled bread, cheese, or leftover meals, were suspended high above the ground for just enough breeze to keep them from spoiling in the heat. Windows at night offered another solution. Families laid planks across the sills, creating simple shelves exposed to the cool night air. Pots of soup, bottles of milk, even trays of vegetables were lined up in hopes the drop in temperature would give them a few more safe hours. For many Berliners, these windows became the go-to spot once the sun set, especially for those living on the upper floors where the breeze was strongest. Some households went even further. If you lived near one of Berlin's older wells or canals, you might take your chances with cooling your food the old-fashioned way. Jars were tied up with string and carefully lowered into well shafts, where the air stayed damp and cool. Others dangled containers into canal grates. Not ideal, considering the pollution and risk of sickness, but when milk could spoil in a single hot afternoon, it felt worth it. Even improvised insulation made a difference. The same wooden crates used in winter came back, but this time they were filled with stuff that kept the heat out, tucked under tables or hidden in shaded corners of a room. These makeshift fridges gave butter and cream just a little more time. Some restaurants, breweries, or ice cream shops still had access to ice, clinging to old supply lines or private stashes. And if you had something to offer, you might be able to trade for a chunk. So summer didn't offer many comforts, but Berliners learned how to wrestle small victories from the heat. With no fridge and no cooling systems, they turned to the world around them. Wet towels, breeze, shadow, and cleverness. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to get by. And as days wore on, they became cleverer and adaptive. It was all about how quickly people adapted. Tricks spread fast. Even the timing of meals changed. Cooking later at night meant leftovers stayed cooler until morning. Food still went bad. Illness from spoiled milk wasn't uncommon. But in a city where everything was uncertain, Berliners found small ways to stay one step ahead of spoilage. So, with no fridge and no promise of what tomorrow might bring, they stretched every ration, made every corner count, and leaned on creativity more than technology. So, the next time your fridge stops working for a few hours, think of the Berliners who kept meals cold throughout bombings, blackouts, and even hot summers. And here's a quick thought for you. What about the countryside, where families had wells, spring houses, and root cellars instead of crowded courtyards? We'll explore that next. So if you found this story fascinating, hit like and subscribe, because in the next video, we're heading to rural Germany, where nature itself became the refrigerator.